in the rolling hills of Millbrook County, Tennessee, where the morning mist clings to weathered barns and secrets hide behind every rusted gate. Nobody could have predicted that salvation would come on for hooves. What started as whispers of suspicion in a tight-knit farming community would transform into a story so extraordinary that even the local sheriff struggled to believe the evidence before his eyes. This is the tale of how a single goat named Jasper would expose a web of deception that had been poisoning the heart of rural America for decades, and how sometimes the most unlikely guardian angels walk among us, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The town of Cedar Falls had always prided itself on its simplicity. Population 847, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or so they thought. Sarah Mae Henderson had lived in the same farmhouse on Hickory Lane for 37 years, raising her 3 children alone after her husband died in a farming accident. At 52, she had weathered every storm life threw at her with the quiet determination that defined mountain folk. Her nearest neighbor, old Ezra Whitlock, lived a quarter-mile down the gravel road in a cabin that had seen better days, surrounded by a menagerie of rescued animals that he cared for with the devotion of a saint. It was Ezra who first brought Jasper to Sarah Mae's attention on that humid August morning when the cicadas were singing their relentless song. The goat had appeared on Ezra's property 3 weeks prior, thin and skittish, bearing no tags or markings to indicate ownership. Despite posting notices at Murphy's General Store and asking around at the weekly church social, nobody claimed the animal. Jasper was unusual for a goat, with his stark white coat marked by distinctive black patches around his eyes that gave him an almost mystical appearance. More peculiar still was his behavior, intelligent and watchful in ways that made even seasoned farmers take notice. Sarah Mae had initially declined Ezra's offer to take the goat, explaining that she had enough responsibilities managing her small vegetable farm and part-time job at the county courthouse. But Ezra was persistent, pointing out that Jasper seemed drawn to her property, often found grazing near the fence line that separated their lands. There was something about the animal that troubled the old man, though he couldn't quite articulate what it was. Jasper's eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and his movements were purposeful in ways that defied typical goat behavior. The first hook came during their conversation that morning when Ezra mentioned something that would haunt Sarah Mae for weeks to come. He had noticed that Jasper became agitated every evening around sunset, pacing the fence line and bleating in what sounded almost like warnings. The goat's behavior intensified whenever certain vehicles passed by on the county road, particularly a dark blue pickup truck that belonged to Deputy Marshal Dale Thornton. This detail struck Sarah Mae as odd, considering Dale had been her late husband's best friend and had always been protective of her family. Why would an animal react with such obvious distress to someone who was supposed to represent safety and order in their community? Against her better judgment, Sarah Mae agreed to take Jasper on a trial basis. The goat settled into his new surroundings with remarkable ease, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He showed no interest in wandering beyond the property boundaries, instead choosing to position himself strategically where he could observe both the main road and the approach to Sarah Mae's house. His presence brought an unexpected sense of security to the isolated farm, though Sarah Mae couldn't explain why she felt safer with the animal nearby. The strange incidents began almost immediately after Jasper's arrival. Sarah Mae started noticing small disturbances around her property, things that could easily be dismissed as coincidence or the work of wild animals. Her garden gate would be found open in the morning despite her certainty that she had latched it the night before. Footprints appeared in the soft earth around her well, too large to belong to any of her neighbors and wearing a distinctive boot pattern with a worn heel that left an unusual mark. Most unsettling of all, she began finding evidence that someone had been on her porch during the night. Cigarette butts of a brand she didn't recognize and the faint scent of cologne that lingered in the morning air. Each time these incidents occurred, Jasper would be found positioned near Sarah Mae's front door, alert and watchful, as if he had appointed himself as her guardian. The goat's nocturnal vigils became a source of both comfort and concern. While his presence seemed to deter whatever or whoever was disturbing her property, it also confirmed that the threats were real. Sarah Mae began to realize that her isolated location, once a source of peace and privacy, had made her vulnerable to something far more sinister than she had initially imagined. The second hook came 3 weeks into Jasper's residency when Sarah Mae discovered something that would forever change her perception of her quiet rural community. She had risen early to tend to her chickens and found Jasper standing over something near the old oak tree that marked the boundary of her property. Approaching cautiously, she discovered a small metal object partially buried in the dirt, its surface reflecting the morning sunlight. Upon closer inspection, it proved to be a cell phone, its screen cracked but still functional. The device had been recording, and when Sarah Mae managed to access its contents, she found hours of footage documenting the exterior of her house, taken from various angles during what appeared to be nighttime surveillance. The implications were terrifying. Someone had been systematically watching her, documenting her routines, and presumably planning something that required detailed knowledge of her daily activities. The phone contained no identification, but the metadata revealed that the recordings had been taken over a period of several weeks, dating back to before Jasper's arrival. More disturbing still, the final recording showed a figure approaching her house on the night before she found the device, only to retreat quickly when Jasper appeared in frame, positioning himself between the intruder and the front door. The goat had literally saved her from whatever this person had intended to do. Sarah May's hands trembled as she scrolled through the footage, recognizing her own movements captured from the shadows like scenes from a horror movie. She saw herself tending her garden, hanging laundry, and sitting on her porch in the evening, all recorded without her knowledge or consent. The violation felt overwhelming, but what frightened her most was the realization that this level of surveillance suggested planning for something far more serious than simple harassment. Someone had been preparing for an action that required intimate knowledge of her habits and vulnerabilities, and only Jasper's unexpected presence had disrupted their timeline. The decision to involve law enforcement was complicated by the fact that Deputy Marshal Dale Thornton was the primary peace officer for their rural district. Sarah May had known Dale for over 15 years, and he had been nothing but supportive following her husband's death, helping with everything from legal paperwork to minor repairs around the property. However, Jasper's consistent agitation in response to Dale's presence created a nagging doubt that she couldn't ignore. Animals, particularly those that had survived on their own, often possessed instincts about people that humans missed. If Jasper sensed something wrong about Dale, Sarah May felt obligated to consider the possibility, however unlikely it seemed. Instead of calling Dale directly, Sarah May decided to drive to the county seat and speak with Sheriff Tom Bradley, a man she knew by reputation but had never dealt with personally. The 30-mile drive to Clarksville gave her time to organize her thoughts and prepare for what she knew would sound like an incredible story. She brought the cell phone as evidence, along with photographs of the footprints and other disturbances around her property. Most importantly, she brought detailed observations of Jasper's behavior, documenting his reactions to different people and situations with the thoroughness of a trained investigator. Sheriff Bradley listened to Sarah May's account with the patient attention of a man who had heard his share of unusual stories over his 25-year career in law enforcement. He was a tall, lean man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. While he acknowledged that the situation was concerning, he also pointed out the challenges they faced in pursuing an investigation. The cell phone could have been dropped by anyone, the footprints were circumstantial at best, and an animal's behavior, however unusual, wasn't admissible evidence in any legal proceeding. However, he agreed that the pattern of incidents warranted attention and promised to conduct a discreet inquiry into the matter. What Sheriff Bradley didn't tell Sarah May was that her report had triggered recognition of a pattern that had been troubling him for months. Over the past year, 3 women living alone in rural areas of the county had reported similar incidents of surveillance and harassment. Each case had been investigated by Deputy Marshal Dale Thornton, who had filed reports indicating that no evidence of criminal activity had been found. The women had been advised to improve their home security and contact law enforcement if the incidents escalated. In each case, the harassment had eventually stopped, leading Dale to conclude that the perpetrator had moved on or lost interest. Now, with Sarah May's report providing concrete evidence of surveillance, Sheriff Bradley began to wonder if the earlier cases had been dismissed too quickly. That evening, Sheriff Bradley initiated his own surveillance operation, positioning himself where he could observe Sarah May's property without being detected. He arrived after sunset and settled in for what he expected might be a long and uneventful night. The rural darkness was complete, broken only by the occasional sweep of headlights on the county road and the distant glow of porch lights from scattered farmhouses. Through night vision binoculars, he could see Jasper positioned near Sarah May's front door, alert and motionless like a statue carved from moonlight. Around midnight, Sheriff Bradley's patience was rewarded when a dark-colored pickup truck approached slowly along the county road, its headlights extinguished. The vehicle stopped approximately 200 yards from Sarah May's driveway and remained stationary for several minutes. Through his binoculars, Sheriff Bradley could see the driver surveying the property, apparently waiting for optimal conditions to proceed. What happened next confirmed the sheriff's worst suspicions about the identity of Sarah May's stalker and the scope of the corruption that had infected his department. The truck's door opened quietly, and a figure emerged wearing dark clothing and moving with the practiced stealth of someone familiar with covert operations. Even in the darkness, Sheriff Bradley recognized the distinctive gait and build of Deputy Marshal Dale Thornton. The man he had trusted to protect the citizens of their county was the same person who had been terrorizing vulnerable women under cover of his official authority. Dale moved towards Sarah May's house with obvious familiarity, suggesting that this was far from his first nocturnal visit to the property. He carried what appeared to be a small bag of equipment, contents unknown, but clearly intended for some purpose that required him to gain access to the house or its immediate surroundings. As Dale approached the front porch, Jasper materialized. From the shadows, like an avenging spirit, the goat positioned himself directly in the intruder's path, his white coat visible even in the darkness. His posture radiating controlled aggression. For a moment, man and animal faced each other in a silent standoff that would determine the course of events for the remainder of the night. Dale had clearly encountered Jasper before and understood that the goat represented an obstacle he hadn't anticipated when planning his operation. The animal's presence meant that any attempt to approach the house would likely result in noise and commotion that could wake Sarah May and ruin whatever scheme Dale had been planning. Sheriff Bradley watched in fascination as Dale attempted to circumvent Jasper's guard by moving toward the side of the house. The goat anticipated this strategy and shifted position to maintain his protective stance, keeping himself between Dale and any potential route to the house. This continued for several minutes, a deadly game of chess played out in the darkness, between a corrupt law enforcement officer and a goat that seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of the threat he was confronting. Finally, frustrated by his inability to proceed, Dale retreated to his truck and drove away, leaving Jasper victorious in his nocturnal watch. The evidence Sheriff Bradley had gathered that night was sufficient to justify a full investigation into Dale Thornton's activities, but the sheriff understood that they were dealing with someone who possessed both the training and authority to cover his tracks effectively. Dale had access to evidence rooms, knew how to manipulate reports, and could use his position to discredit any accusations brought against him. Building a case that would stand up in court would require careful planning and absolute discretion, particularly since Dale might have allies within the law enforcement community who were either complicit in his activities or willing to protect him out of misguided loyalty. The next morning, Sheriff Bradley met privately with Sarah May to share what he had observed and outline the steps they would need to take to ensure her safety while building a case against Dale. The revelation that her stalker was someone she had trusted and considered a friend was devastating, but it also explained how he had gained such detailed knowledge of her routines and vulnerabilities. As a deputy marshal, Dale had legitimate reasons to visit her property, and she had welcomed him into her home on numerous occasions, never suspecting that he was gathering intelligence for his twisted purposes. Sheriff Bradley's investigation into Dale's activities revealed a pattern of behavior that was both methodical and escalating. The 3 previous cases of harassment had followed an identical progression, beginning with surveillance and gradually increasing in intensity until the victims felt compelled to relocate for their own safety. In each instance, Dale had been the investigating officer, using his position to monitor the women's responses and adjust his tactics accordingly. The sheriff realized that they were dealing with a predator who had weaponized his law enforcement authority to torment vulnerable women, while maintaining plausible deniability about his involvement. The challenge of gathering evidence against Dale was complicated by his familiarity with investigative procedures and his access to law enforcement resources. However, Sheriff Bradley had one advantage that Dale couldn't have anticipated. Jasper's unwavering vigilance had disrupted the deputy's timeline and forced him to alter his established pattern. For the first time, Dale was operating outside his comfort zone, facing an obstacle that couldn't be intimidated or manipulated through official channels. The goat's presence had essentially forced the predator into the open, where his actions could be documented and used as evidence against him, working with state investigators to ensure the integrity of their case. Sheriff Bradley established a comprehensive surveillance operation around Sarah May's property. Multiple officers were positioned at strategic locations, equipped with recording equipment and night vision technology that would capture any attempt by Dale to approach the house. They also installed motion-activated cameras around the property perimeter, creating a digital net that would document any trespassing incidents. Most importantly, they positioned officers where they could observe Jasper's behavior. Using the goat's reactions as an early warning system for detecting Dale's presence, the trap was set on a moonless Thursday night in late September when the autumn chill had begun to settle over the Tennessee hills. Dale arrived at his usual time, but instead of the isolated surveillance target he expected, he found himself surrounded by law enforcement officers who had been waiting for hours. The contents of his equipment bag revealed the true scope of his intended crimes: restraints, sedatives, and other items that suggested plans far more sinister than simple harassment. When confronted with the evidence, Dale initially attempted to claim that he was conducting an unofficial investigation into reports of suspicious activity around Sarah May's property, but the presence of the restraints made this explanation impossible to maintain. Under interrogation, Dale's facade of respectability crumbled completely, revealing a man who had been living a double life for years. He confessed to systematically targeting women who lived alone in rural areas, using his law enforcement position to gain their trust and gather intelligence about their vulnerabilities. His method involved a gradual escalation of harassment, designed to terrorize his victims into relocating. at which point he would move on to new targets. Sarah May had been selected because of her isolation and his familiarity with her property gained through his friendship with her late husband. The investigation expanded as other victims came forward, women who had been too frightened or ashamed to report their experiences initially. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of a predator who had been operating with impunity for nearly a decade, protected by his badge and the assumption that law enforcement officers were inherently trustworthy. Dale had exploited the isolation and vulnerability of rural women, knowing that they were less likely to be believed if they made accusations against a respected member of the community. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Sarah May found herself grappling with the realization that her salvation had come from the most unlikely source imaginable. Jasper had appeared in their lives at exactly the moment he was needed most, as if guided by some force that understood the danger she faced. The goat's protective instincts and unwavering vigilance had prevented what could have been a tragedy, buying time for law enforcement to gather the evidence needed to stop a predator who had been terrorizing their community for years. The trial of Dale Thornton became a sensation in the local media, highlighting the vulnerability of rural women and the potential for corruption within law enforcement agencies. Testimonies from multiple victims painted a picture of systematic abuse of power that shocked the community and prompted reviews of procedures within the sheriff's department. Dale was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison on multiple charges including stalking, attempted kidnapping, and abuse of authority, bringing justice to women who had suffered in silence for years. In the months following the trial, Sarah May's relationship with Jasper deepened into something that defied conventional understanding. The goat had proven himself to be more than just a guardian. He was a companion who seemed to understand human emotions and respond to them with appropriate comfort and support. Veterinary experts who examined Jasper found him to be in excellent health despite his mysterious origins, with intelligence levels that exceeded normal parameters for his species. Some suggested that his protective instincts might have been developed through previous experiences with dangerous situations, while others believed that certain animals possessed intuitive abilities that allowed them to detect threats that humans missed. The community's perception of Jasper transformed from suspicion to reverence as word of his role in stopping Dale Thornton spread throughout the county. Visitors began arriving at Sarah May's farm, drawn by curiosity about the goat who had saved a woman's life through his unwavering vigilance. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon national media outlets were requesting interviews about the unlikely hero of Cedar Falls. Sarah May found herself thrust into an spotlight she never wanted, but she graciously accepted the attention because it helped raise awareness about the vulnerability of rural women and the importance of trusting animal instincts. The mystery of Jasper's origins remained unsolved, despite extensive efforts to trace his background. No missing animal reports matched his description, and genetic testing revealed nothing unusual about his breeding or ancestry. It was as if he had materialized specifically to fulfill his role as Sarah May's protector, disappearing from wherever he came from at exactly the moment he was needed most. This supernatural quality to his appearance and behavior led some community members to view him as a guardian angel sent in animal form, while others preferred more practical explanations for his remarkable intelligence and protective instincts. As winter settled over the Tennessee hills, Sarah May reflected on the events that had transformed her quiet life into something resembling a miracle story. The woman who had once lived in isolation and fear now found herself surrounded by a community that had rallied to support her, brought together by their shared amazement at how justice had prevailed through the most unlikely of circumstances. Jasper continued his nightly vigils, though the threat he had been guarding against was now safely locked away. His presence remained a source of comfort and security, a reminder that protection could come from unexpected sources, and that, sometimes salvation walked on for hooves. The legacy of Jasper's intervention extended far beyond Sarah May's individual case, prompting changes in how rural law enforcement agencies handled reports of harassment and stalking. Training programs were implemented to help officers recognize the signs of colleague misconduct, and new protocols were established for investigating cases involving vulnerable populations. The goat's story became a symbol of hope for women who had felt powerless against those who abused positions of authority, proving that even the most unlikely allies could make a difference when courage was needed most. In the years that followed, Sarah May established the Jasper Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping rural women recognize the warning signs of stalking and harassment. The foundation provided resources for home security improvements, legal assistance, and counseling services for victims of rural crimes. Sarah May traveled throughout Tennessee and neighboring states, sharing her story and educating communities about the importance of taking animal behavior seriously as an indicator of potential threats. Her presentations always featured Jasper, who had become something of a celebrity in his own right, drawing crowds wherever they appeared together. The foundation's work revealed the extent to which rural women had been suffering in silence. isolated by geography and intimidated by the very systems that were supposed to protect them. Sarah May's story gave voice to countless others who had experienced similar harassment but lacked the courage or resources to seek help. The Jasper Foundation created a network of support that spanned multiple states, connecting victims with advocates and ensuring that no woman had to face these threats alone. The organization also worked with law enforcement agencies to improve training and protocols for investigating rural crimes, helping officers understand the unique challenges faced by women living in isolated areas. Jasper's role in the foundation's work extended beyond mere symbolism. The goat demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect individuals with predatory intentions, a skill that proved invaluable during community outreach events. On several occasions, Jasper's behavior alerted Sarah May and law enforcement officials to the presence of individuals who later proved to have concerning backgrounds or intentions. This phenomenon attracted the attention of animal behaviorists and researchers who were fascinated by the goat's apparent ability to assess human character with remarkable accuracy. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a professor of animal psychology at Vanderbilt University, conducted extensive studies of Jasper's behavior and cognitive abilities. Her research revealed that the goat possessed exceptional intelligence and an heightened sensitivity to human pheromones and body language that allowed him to detect stress, aggression, and deceptive behavior in ways that humans often missed. Dr. Morrison's findings suggested that certain animals, particularly those that had survived traumatic experiences, developed enhanced protective instincts that could serve as early warning systems for potential threats. Her work with Jasper contributed to a growing body of research about the potential use of animals in security and therapeutic applications. The impact of Jasper's intervention extended into the realm of criminal justice reform, as his story highlighted the vulnerabilities in rural law enforcement systems. The case prompted investigations into other departments across the region, uncovering additional instances of corruption and abuse of power. Several officers were prosecuted based on evidence that emerged during these investigations, and new oversight mechanisms were implemented to prevent similar abuses in the future. The Jasper case became a teaching tool in law enforcement academies, demonstrating the importance of accountability and the dangers of allowing officers to operate without proper supervision. As Sarah May aged SC, she began to worry about what would happen to Jasper after she was no longer able to care for him. The goat had become not just her protector but her closest companion, and the thought of their eventual separation was heartbreaking. However, her concerns were addressed when the town of Cedar Falls officially adopted Jasper as their mascot and guardian, establishing a trust fund to ensure his care for the remainder of his natural life. The gesture reflected the community's recognition of Jasper's contribution to their safety and their desire to honor the animal who had become a symbol of protection and justice. The story of Jasper and Sarah May continued to inspire new generations of advocates and activists who worked to protect vulnerable populations from predators and corruption. Their tale was adapted into books, documentaries, and educational materials that spread their message far beyond the borders of Tennessee. Schools across the country invited Sarah May to speak about personal safety and the importance of trusting instincts, while animal welfare organizations used Jasper's story to promote the therapeutic and protective benefits of human-animal bonds. Even today, more than a decade after that first night when Jasper took his post by Sarah May's door, the goat continues his vigilant watch over the community that embraced him as their guardian. His presence serves as a constant reminder that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most profound acts of protection come from hearts that beat with simple, unwavering loyalty. Visitors to Cedar Falls often comment on the sense of safety and peace they feel in the town, attributing it to the knowledge that somewhere in the rolling hills, a white goat with black patches around his eyes maintains his eternal watch, ready to sound the alarm if danger ever threatens his adopted family again. The legacy of that summer night, when a mysterious goat appeared to save a woman from a corrupt officer, has become woven into the fabric of rural Tennessee folklore. A story passed down from generation to generation as proof that angels walk among us in forms we might never expect. Sarah May Henderson, now in her 70s, still tends her garden with Jasper by her side. Their bond stronger than ever after years of shared vigilance and mutual protection. Their story stands as testament to the truth that safety and justice can emerge from the most unlikely partnerships, and that sometimes salvation comes not from those we expect to protect us, but from those who choose to love us without condition or expectation of reward.